Welcome back, history lovers. Imagine a single day holding epic battles, daring rebellions, groundbreaking inventions, and devastating disasters all rolled into 24 hours. Sounds impossible. Well, September 19th proves it can happen. From the deserts of Syria in the 7th century, where the Rashidun Army changed the course of empires, to the skies of Versailles in the 18th century, where sheep, ducks, and roosters became the first pioneers of flight, this day is packed with moments that shocked the world. Have you ever wondered how a medieval battle could reshape nations, or how one bold vote could ignite global change? How could a single earthquake devastate an entire city, or a space shuttle make humanity look to the stars? Today, you're about to see it all. So stay glued to the screen, because every story we uncover on September 19th didn't just happen in history books. They ripple through time, shaping the world we live in right now. Let's unlock the secrets, the surprises, and the shocking twists of this incredible day, starting right now. In the year 634, history witnessed one of the most defining chapters of the early Islamic conquests. On September 19th, the city of Damascus, an ancient jewel of Syria and a prized possession of the Byzantine Empire, fell to the Rashidun Caliphate under the brilliant military command of Khalid ibn al-Walid, a man remembered as the Sword of God. Let's set the stage. The Byzantine Empire had ruled this region for centuries. Damascus wasn't just any city. It was a major center of trade, culture, and strategy. Caravans passed through its bustling markets, its gates connected vital trade routes, and its walls stood tall as a symbol of imperial strength. For the Byzantines, losing Damascus would mean losing their grip on the heart of the Levant. For the Rashidun Caliphate, capturing it meant a gateway to expansion, not only militarily, but also spiritually and culturally. Khalid ibn al-Walid, already famous for his unmatched battlefield tactics, marched with determination. He was not a man who relied solely on brute force. He was a strategist who understood how to outthink his enemy. The Rashidun forces surrounded Damascus, cutting off supplies and reinforcements. Days turned into weeks as the city's defenders realized they were facing not just soldiers, but an army driven by faith and guided by a general of extraordinary skill. Accounts from chroniclers described fierce clashes outside the city gates. The Byzantines fought desperately to hold on, but Khalid's maneuvers were relentless. Eventually, negotiations began. Some reports say parts of the city were taken by storm, while others were surrendered peacefully under treaty. Whatever the mix of battle and diplomacy, the result was the same. Damascus fell. But why does this matter so much? The capture of Damascus wasn't just a military win, it was a seismic shift in power. For the Byzantine Empire, this was a devastating blow. Imagine the shock in Constantinople, the great Christian empire, losing one of its richest provinces, a city that had once been a beacon of Roman authority. For the Rashidun Caliphate, it was proof that their mission was succeeding, that their expansion into the Levant was unstoppable. The fall of Damascus also changed the cultural and religious identity of the region. Over time, Damascus became one of the most important centers of Islamic civilization. Decades later, it would even rise as the capital of the Umayyad Caliphate, shaping the course of Middle Eastern history for centuries. Mosques, schools, and markets flourished under new leadership, but the city never lost its role as a crossroads of cultures. Think about it this way. September 19th, 634, wasn't just the day a city changed hands, it was the day an empire's borders were redrawn. The day the balance of power in the ancient world shifted dramatically, and the day that laid the groundwork for the Islamic Golden Age that would follow. Even today, when we look at Damascus, the world's oldest continuously inhabited city, we see traces of this turning point. The walls may be worn, the streets may have changed, but the echoes of Khalid ibn al-Walid's triumph still linger in the memory of history. So, as we reflect on that moment, we're reminded that history is not just about battles and dates, it's about transformations that ripple across centuries, shaping the world we live in today. Let's travel to the year 1356, deep into the heart of the Hundred Years' War, one of the longest and most brutal conflicts in European history. On September 19th, the fields near the French town of Poitiers became the stage for one of the war's most dramatic and consequential battles. The Battle of Poitiers. The Hundred Years' War was not just about thrones and crowns. It was about pride, power, and the future of nations. England and France were locked in a struggle that would shape both kingdoms for generations. And at the center of this particular battle was Edward, the Prince of Wales, better known to history as the Black Prince. Edward was a formidable commander, despite his young age. On that September day, his forces, though vastly outnumbered, stood ready against the French army led by King John II himself. The French came in overwhelming numbers. Chroniclers described the French knights as glittering in armor, their banners flying, their confidence high. They believed sheer numbers would crush the English. But Edward the Black Prince had no intention of being overwhelmed. He chose his ground carefully, positioning his troops behind natural defenses of hedges and ditches, forcing the French cavalry to fight uphill and through narrow lanes. This wasn't just a battlefield, it was a trap designed with precision. As the battle began, the English longbowmen unleashed devastating volleys of arrows. These weren't ordinary arrows, they were armor-piercing shafts that rained down in deadly storms. French knights, weighed down by heavy armor, struggled to advance under the relentless fire. Horses panicked, formations broke. What should have been a confident charge turned into chaos. Wave after wave of French assaults were repelled. The English, disciplined and inspired, held their ground. Then came the turning point. As exhaustion spread through the French ranks, Edward launched a counterattack. His men charged, cutting deep into the disorganized French lines. In the melee that followed, something almost unthinkable happened. King John II of France was captured. Yes, the king himself, along with many of his nobles, fell into English hands. The capture of a reigning monarch on the battlefield was rare, almost unthinkable in medieval warfare. For France, it was a humiliation of staggering proportions. The ransom demanded for King John's release was enormous, plunging France into financial and political turmoil. For England, this victory solidified Edward the Black Prince's reputation as one of the greatest commanders of his age. But the Battle of Poitiers was more than just a military clash, it was a turning point in the psychology of the war. It showed that superior tactics, discipline, and strategy could overcome numbers and raw power. It also underscored the rise of the longbow, a weapon that would dominate European battlefields for decades to come. Imagine being a common soldier that day, standing among the hedges, hearing the thunder of hooves, the clash of steel, the cries of wounded men, and the sudden roar of triumph as the French king was taken prisoner. For those who survived, it must have felt like living through a legend. In the long arc of the Hundred Years' War, the Battle of Poitiers stands alongside Crécy and Agincourt as one of England's greatest triumphs. And on September 19, 1356, the balance of power in medieval Europe shifted dramatically, reminding us once again that history often turns on the courage and cunning of a single day's battle. Now, let's move forward to September 19, 1676, across the Atlantic to the English colony of Virginia. What unfolded on this day was not just a rebellion, but a fiery symbol of colonial unrest, one that would echo through America's history. This was the climax of Bacon's rebellion and the burning of Jamestown. At the heart of the story was Nathaniel Bacon, a wealthy but discontented settler. He became the unlikely leader of a rebellion fueled by anger, frustration, and resentment. The colonists were furious with Governor William Barkley, who they felt was corrupt, favored wealthy planters, and failed to protect frontier settlers from Native American raids. Bacon gathered followers, farmers, indentured servants, and landless men. They weren't just angry about security, they were angry about inequality. In many ways, Bacon's rebellion became the first large-scale uprising in the American colonies against colonial authority. By the fall of 1676, tensions had reached a breaking point. Bacon's forces marched on Jamestown, the capital of the colony. Imagine the sight, armed colonists pouring into the small town, determination in their eyes, rage in their hearts. They were no longer just protesting, they were demanding change. On September 19th, the rebellion reached its climax. Bacon and his men set fire to Jamestown. Flames consumed houses, government buildings, and even the governor's own residence. The once proud colonial capital was reduced to smoldering ruins, smoke rising high into the Virginia sky. For many of the rebels, it was a declaration. If the government would not listen, they would destroy it. Governor Barkley fled, watching helplessly as the colony's center of power went up in flames. To the rebels, this was victory. To the colonial elite, it was chaos. But here's the twist. Just weeks later, Nathaniel Bacon himself died suddenly of dysentery. Without their leader, the rebellion collapsed. Berkeley returned to power and brutally punished those who had taken part. Yet, the legacy of that fiery September night remained. Bacon's rebellion exposed deep fractures in colonial society between rich and poor, between settlers and indigenous peoples, between the governed and those who ruled them. It also forced the colonial elite to rethink how they controlled labor. Many historians argue that after the rebellion, Virginia began shifting more heavily toward African slavery, seeing it as a safer form of labor control compared to restless indentured servants who might rebel again. So, when we look back at the burning of Jamestown, it's not just about a town in flames. It's about the birth of a pattern, ordinary people rising up against authority, demanding fairness, and shaking the very foundations of colonial rule. On that day, September 19th, 1676, Jamestown burned, but in those flames, you can see the sparks of future revolutions, including the American Revolution itself, a century later. Bacon's rebellion remains a fiery chapter in America's story, one that reminds us how fragile power can be when people refuse to be silent. On September 19, 1777, the fields of upstate New York witnessed the opening clash of what would become one of the most pivotal battles of the American Revolution, the Battle of Saratoga. But on this day, it was only the beginning, the first phase of a confrontation that would eventually change the course of history. The British, under General John Burgoyne, had devised a grand strategy. The plan was to march south from Canada, seize control of the Hudson River Valley, and effectively cut the rebellious colonies in half. By isolating New England, the hotbed of revolution, they hoped to crush the uprising once and for all. But standing in their way were the American forces commanded by General Horatio Gates and aided by the fiery and unpredictable Benedict Arnold, a man whose courage on the battlefield was undeniable. On the morning of September 19th, Burgoyne's forces advanced near a place called Freeman's Farm. The Americans were waiting. As the British moved forward, colonial sharpshooters took to the woods, targeting officers and disrupting formations. The battle quickly escalated into a fierce struggle that raged for hours. Imagine the scene. Musket fire cracking through the forest, cannons thundering across the fields, soldiers clashing in close combat. The smell of gunpowder filled the air as smoke blanketed the countryside. Freeman's Farm became a cauldron of chaos, bravery, and bloodshed. One of the most critical figures that day was Benedict Arnold. Although often remembered later for betrayal, on this day he was nothing less than heroic. He led his men with reckless courage, rallying troops, charging into danger, and pushing the fight against the British line. Without Arnold's energy, the American defense might have collapsed. By nightfall, the battle remained indecisive. The British technically held the field, but at a devastating cost. Burgoyne's forces had suffered heavy casualties, over 600 men. The Americans, though bloodied, held firm and grew stronger in resolve. The first phase of Saratoga did not deliver Burgoyne the victory he expected. Instead, it set the stage for his eventual disaster. The importance of this opening clash cannot be overstated. It gave the Americans confidence. It showed the world that they could stand toe-to-toe with one of the greatest armies of the age. And it laid the groundwork for the Second Battle of Saratoga just weeks later, a battle that would end in Burgoyne's surrender and bring France decisively into the war on the side of the Americans. So, when we remember September 19th, 1777, we see the beginning of a turning point. At Freeman's Farm, American determination was tested and proven. And from those smoke-filled fields, the road to independence became a little clearer. September 19th, 1783, Versailles, France. A crowd gathered in the palace gardens, their eyes fixed on a strange contraption rising before them. It was round, colorful, and unlike anything they had ever seen. For centuries, humans had looked to the skies, dreaming of flight. And on this day, that dream took a daring step closer to reality. The Montgolfier brothers, Joseph Michel and Joquetienne, were paper manufacturers by trade, but visionaries by nature. They had discovered that when heated air filled a lightweight fabric balloon, the balloon would rise. The science was not yet fully understood, but the spectacle was undeniable. And now, before the French royal court, they were about to stage a demonstration that would shock Europe. But here's what makes this moment especially fascinating. They weren't yet ready to risk human passengers. Instead, the honor of being the first living creatures to fly went to a sheep, a duck, and a rooster. Yes, you heard that right. A barnyard trio became aviation pioneers. The balloon itself was enormous, over 20 feet high, painted in royal colors of blue and gold, decorated with suns and fleurs de lis, symbols meant to impress King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. As the fire beneath the balloon roared, smoke billowed, and the fabric began to lift. The animals, secured in a wicker basket, probably had no idea they were about to make history. As the balloon rose into the air, gasps and cheers erupted from the crowd. Imagine the astonishment. For the first time, living beings were floating freely above the earth. The balloon soared nearly 2 miles before drifting gently back down to the fields. The animals were found safe, though likely quite bewildered, proving that flight might indeed be possible for humans. This single demonstration electrified France and beyond. Suddenly, the idea of human flight was no longer just fantasy or myth, it was science, innovation, and reality in motion. Within months, the Montgolfiers would go further, sending people into the skies and forever changing the course of human history. Think about it, this whimsical experiment, watched by royalty and commoners alike, opened the door to hot air balloons, airships, airplanes, and eventually space travel. The sheep, duck, and rooster of Versailles became unlikely trailblazers in mankind's eternal quest to conquer the skies. So, on September 19, 1783, the world looked up and saw a possibility. It wasn't just a balloon rising into the air, it was the human spirit itself, daring to defy gravity for the very first time. September 19, 1796. The United States was still a young nation, barely a decade into its independence. Its leader, George Washington, stood at the height of respect and influence. Twice unanimously elected president, the hero of the Revolution could have ruled for life if he had wanted. But Washington had something different in mind. He wanted to step away from power. And in doing so, he left behind one of the most important political documents in American history. His farewell address. The farewell address wasn't a speech delivered aloud, it was a letter, carefully written and published in newspapers across the country. And it carried Washington's wisdom, warnings, and hopes for the future of the United States. Imagine the moment, the first president of a fragile republic voluntarily walking away from power. It was almost unheard of in a world dominated by kings and emperors. His decision set a precedent of peaceful transition that still defines American democracy today. But what exactly did Washington say? First, he warned against the dangers of political factions. He had seen how bitter divisions could tear a nation apart, and he feared that partisan conflict would undermine unity. Looking at America today, with its deep political divides, his warning feels almost prophetic. Second, Washington urged caution in foreign affairs. He believed the United States should avoid permanent alliances with other nations. Not because he opposed friendship, but because he understood that entangling commitments could drag America into wars it wasn't ready to fight. For over a century, Washington's call for neutrality shaped U.S. foreign policy. And finally, Washington reminded Americans of the importance of morality, religion, and education as the foundations of a free society. He understood that democracy wasn't just about laws, it depended on the character of its people. The farewell address was more than advice. It was a vision for what America could become if it stayed true to unity, independence, and principle. And for Washington himself, it was a final act of service, choosing to give up power rather than cling to it. Think about the impact. In a world where most leaders refused to let go, Washington's decision stunned foreign observers. Britain's King George III is said to have remarked that if Washington truly gave up power and returned to private life, he will be the greatest man in the world. And that's exactly what he did. Washington retired to Mount Vernon, closing a chapter in American history, but leaving a legacy that still guides the United States today. His farewell address continues to be read in Congress every year. A reminder that even centuries later, his voice still speaks to the challenges of democracy. So, on September 19, 1796, America didn't just say goodbye to its first president, it inherited a roadmap for the future. A reminder that leadership is not only about holding power, but also about knowing when to let it go. September 19, 1881. After months of pain, struggle, and national uncertainty, The United States lost its 20th president, James A. Garfield. His story is one of promise, tragedy, and lessons that would forever change the way America thought about medicine, politics, and presidential security. James A. Garfield was not born into privilege. In fact, he was the last U.S. president to be born in a log cabin. He worked his way through college, served as a teacher, a Civil War general, and eventually a congressman. By 1880, he emerged as a compromise candidate for the Republican Party and won the presidency almost unexpectedly. His rise was seen as a classic American success story, a poor boy who climbed to the very top through intelligence and determination. But Garfield's presidency would be tragically short. Just 4 months after taking office, on July 2, 1881, he was shot by a disgruntled office seeker named Charles J. Guiteau at a Washington, D.C. train station. The nation was horrified, but the gunshot itself wasn't immediately fatal. In fact, many historians argue Garfield could have survived if not for the medical practices of the time. Here's why. In 1881, the field of medicine was just beginning to accept the importance of germs and sterilization. European doctors like Joseph Lister had promoted antiseptic surgery, but many American physicians remained skeptical. After Garfield was shot, his doctors repeatedly probed the wound with unwashed hands and instruments, trying to find the bullet. This caused severe infections, which slowly weakened him over the course of the summer. The American people followed every detail of Garfield's condition. Newspapers published daily updates, crowds gathered outside the White House, and the nation prayed for his recovery. The suffering president was moved to the Jersey Shore in hopes that the sea air would ease his pain. Sadly, it was too late. On September 19, 1881, after 79 agonizing days, James A. Garfield died from infection and internal complications caused by the bullet wound. The impact of his death was enormous. Vice President Chester A. Arthur became president, and many Americans questioned how such a tragedy could have been prevented. Garfield's assassination sparked renewed attention on two major issues. First, presidential security. At the time, there was no Secret Service protection for presidents. Garfield's death, along with Abraham Lincoln's before him, made it clear that America's leaders needed far greater protection. Second, medical reform. The debate over antiseptic practices grew louder, and over time, the medical community in the United States fully embraced sterilization and modern surgical methods practices that might have saved Garfield's life had they been followed. In the end, Garfield's presidency lasted just 200 days, making it one of the shortest in American history. Yet his death changed the course of medicine, influenced civil service reform, and highlighted the vulnerability of America's highest office. So, on September 19, 1881, the nation mourned not only the loss of a president, but also the painful reminder of how fragile life and democracy could be. Garfield's story remains both inspiring and tragic. A symbol of how greatness can rise from humble beginnings and how quickly it can be taken away. September 19, 1893, an extraordinary day in world history. On this date, New Zealand became the very first country on Earth to grant women the right to vote in national elections. It's easy to take voting rights for granted today, but in the late 19th century, the idea of women participating in politics was controversial, even radical. In much of the Western world, women were expected to remain in the private sphere, managing households, raising families, and staying out of politics. Yet, in New Zealand, a group of determined activists challenged that belief and made history. At the forefront of this movement was Kate Shepherd, a name every student of democracy should know. Shepherd and her fellow suffragists organized petitions, wrote articles, and gave speeches across the country. They argued that women were not only capable of making political decisions, but that their voices were essential for building a more just and moral society. Their efforts were relentless. In 1893, they presented a massive petition to Parliament, signed by nearly 1 in 4 adult women in New Zealand, a staggering number for the time. This petition was rolled out on the floor of Parliament, stretching for hundreds of feet, a powerful visual reminder of the demand for change. And it worked. On September 19, 1893, the Electoral Act was signed into law, making New Zealand the first nation in the world to grant women the right to vote in national elections. Imagine the excitement, the sense of victory, when women realized they had finally secured a place in the democratic process. But the story doesn't end there. New Zealand's bold step had ripple effects across the globe. Suffrage activists in the United States, Britain, and elsewhere pointed to New Zealand as proof that women could and should be trusted with the ballot. Over the next few decades, countries around the world followed suit, though not without struggle. It's important to note that this victory was not perfect or complete. While women gained the right to vote, they still could not run for parliament until 1919, and like many countries of the time, Indigenous women faced additional barriers. But still, 1893 marked the beginning of something bigger: the recognition that democracy must include all voices. So, on September 19, 1893, New Zealand didn't just change its own laws, it changed the course of history, inspiring a global movement for equality and justice. And more than a century later, their legacy continues to remind us that democracy is strongest when everyone has a voice. Now, we move into one of the darkest chapters of September 19th in history, the capture of Kiev by Nazi Germany in 1941. During World War II, the Eastern Front was a brutal theater of war, where millions of soldiers and civilians faced unimaginable hardships. Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, was a strategic stronghold. Its capture was vital for the Nazis' Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union. In August 1941, German forces encircled the city, trapping hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. The siege was relentless. For weeks, artillery barrages and air attacks devastated the city. Civilians lived in constant fear, with bombings destroying homes, schools, and hospitals. Streets that had once been bustling were reduced to rubble and chaos. The Soviet forces inside Kiev attempted to defend the city, but the Germans' military strategy, combining speed, coordination, and overwhelming firepower, was devastatingly effective. On September 19, 1941, the city fell. The capture of Kiev resulted in one of the largest encirclements of Soviet troops during the war, with hundreds of thousands captured or killed. But the human cost went far beyond the battlefield. The occupation that followed was marked by mass executions, forced labor, and suffering for the civilian population. Kiev's capture was not only a military victory for the Nazis, but also a humanitarian disaster, leaving scars that would last for generations. This event was a turning point on the Eastern Front. It demonstrated the incredible efficiency of the German blitzkrieg, but also foreshadowed the brutal war of attrition that would eventually lead to their downfall. And today, when we look back at September 19, 1941, we remember the courage of those who resisted, the lives lost, and the lessons of history that remind us of the human cost of war. Fast forward to September 19, 1976, and we arrive at a moment that marked the dawn of a new era in space exploration: the unveiling of the Space Shuttle Enterprise. The Enterprise wasn't built to fly in space, but served as a critical prototype for NASA's Space Shuttle program. Engineers and scientists designed it to test the aerodynamic and operational aspects of the shuttle, laying the groundwork for the reusable spacecraft that would revolutionize human space. Picture the excitement at the unveiling ceremony at the Rockwell International Plant in Palmdale, California. NASA officials, engineers, astronauts, and space enthusiasts gathered to witness this magnificent engineering marvel. The Enterprise, sleek and futuristic, embodied the dreams of a generation that had watched the Apollo moon landings just a few years earlier. The shuttle program itself was ambitious. Unlike the single-use rockets of the past, a reusable shuttle promised to make space travel more routine, more economical, and more versatile. Tests conducted with Enterprise included approach and landing tests, where it was carried atop a Boeing 747 and released to glide to Earth, simulating real re-entry conditions. These tests were crucial to ensure the safety and functionality of later operational shuttles like Columbia, Challenger, and Discovery. September 19, 1976, is remembered as a day when dreams of space travel moved closer to reality. The unveiling of Enterprise signaled a shift in human ambition from reaching the moon to establishing a sustainable presence in space. It inspired engineers, students, and enthusiasts worldwide to imagine a future where humans could routinely explore beyond our planet. And it laid the foundation for decades of discoveries, satellite launches, and international cooperation in space exploration. On September 19, 1985, tragedy struck one of the largest cities in the world, Mexico City. A massive earthquake, registering 8.0 on the Richter scale, devastated the metropolis, leaving thousands dead and countless more injured. Buildings collapsed, roads cracked, and the city's infrastructure was severely damaged. The epicenter was located off the Pacific coast, but the seismic waves traveled far, affecting the heart of Mexico City. Due to the soft, water-saturated clay of the ancient lakebed beneath the city, buildings suffered amplified shaking, leading to catastrophic damage, particularly in high-rise structures. Imagine the chaos: people trapped under rubble, neighborhoods flattened, and the city plunged into darkness. Emergency responders, volunteers, and ordinary citizens rushed to save lives, forming human chains to pull survivors from the wreckage. International aid poured in, and Mexico's response became a defining moment of resilience and solidarity. This earthquake also transformed urban planning and construction codes in Mexico. Engineers studied the disaster to improve building standards and seismic preparedness, ensuring that future earthquakes would not result in the same level of devastation. September 19, 1985, is remembered not only as a day of sorrow, but as a day that demonstrated human courage, unity, and the importance of learning from nature's unpredictable power. The city rebuilt itself, and the memory of this earthquake continues to shape disaster preparedness and community response in Mexico and beyond. On September 19, 2006, Thailand experienced a dramatic and historic political upheaval. The military staged a coup d'etat, overthrowing Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatра's government and dissolving the parliament. Thaksin, a billionaire businessman turned politician, had been a polarizing figure. Supporters praised his economic reforms and efforts to reduce poverty, while critics accused him of corruption, abuse of power, and undermining democratic institutions. Tensions had been escalating for months, with protests, demonstrations, and political unrest gripping Bangkok and other major cities. In the early hours of September 19th, military forces moved swiftly, taking control of key government buildings, media outlets, and transportation hubs. The coup was carried out with minimal violence, but it sent shockwaves through the nation and the international community. The military justified its actions by claiming the need to restore order, protect the monarchy, and ensure political stability. The aftermath was complex. Political parties were dissolved, constitutional reforms were initiated, and Thaksin went into exile. Thailand's democratic journey faced significant challenges, and debates about governance, power, and civil rights intensified. This event is a crucial chapter in modern Thai history. It highlights the fragile balance between democratic institutions and military influence in politics. Even today, discussions about the 2006 coup inform Thailand's political landscape and the ongoing struggle for democracy, stability, and governance. September 19, 2006, remains a day that reminds us how swiftly political power can shift and how deeply such events can shape a nation's future. And there you have it. September 19th has witnessed events that shaped history in profound ways. From the Rashidun Army's capture of Damascus in 634 to New Zealand granting women the right to vote in 1893, and Thailand's dramatic political coup in 2006, each moment tells a story of power, courage, change, and resilience. History isn't just about dates and names. It's about understanding the people, the struggles, and the choices that have shaped the world we live in today. Every decision, every protest, every reform echoes across time, reminding us that the past is alive and it continues to influence our present and our future. If you enjoyed this deep dive into September 19th, make sure to hit the like button. It really helps our videos reach more history enthusiasts around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Today's History Official and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our weekly episodes exploring the events that changed the course of history. Also, we want to hear from you. What moment on September 19th stood out the most to you? Was it the rise of the Rashidun Army, New Zealand's groundbreaking suffrage, or the political upheaval in Thailand? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love engaging with fellow history fans. And remember, history is more than just the past. It's a living story that connects us all. By exploring it, we gain insight, perspective, and inspiration to shape a better tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. Keep being curious, keep learning, and keep listening to history. See you in the next video.